No, I had a very, very interesting conversation with him, and I think we are more or less on the same wavelength.
Hmm.
And yeah, we were talking about the social construction of science.
Hmm.
And I would rephrase this as a question. How far is science a social construction? Yeah, because he says that science is just a social construction. Well, he didn't say just.
Right, right,
He said science is a social construction. As I understand it, it means, or at I see it because this came not up in the conversation. It came up in my mind later. Because essentially I agree with him that
Mhm.
there is lots of social construction in the scientific view, in science, etc. But I wouldn't say that science is a social construction.
Right.
I would rephrase it and say that science is subjected, is influenced by social constructions.
Just, yeah, before you, I want to hear the complete sentence, but when you say science, science covers what I do in a clinical study with
Yeah.
someone with anxiety and what you do in exploring the subatomic realm. So when like psychology is like probably 50, 80% social construction, sociology more so, whereas certain areas of quantum physics, if you forget the theories, is like, yeah, so just, yeah,
Yeah. This involves also the question, uh, what is science? Yeah,
exactly. Right.
this is something that philosophers of the last century debated about for about a century, and they didn't come to a final definition, conclusion, agreement. There is a this also can be very subjective because there are things that people would say it's not science. For example,
Mhm.
psychology, psychotherapy, psychoanalysis. I think especially the most reductionist and physicalist empiricists would claim, no, that's not science. But I would also then say that a lot of medicine, modern medicine, isn't really scientific in the empirical sense that you have a theory, you make a measurement, you have a mathematical formula, and you check whether that's true or false.
Right.
So I would say about 50% of medicine would be not could
Well,
not be considered science either.
let's specify this because you just said it beautifully. Okay. So you have an apparently objective phenomenon, you measure it, you create some basic theory, which is really not philosophical, it's a theory aimed at prediction and control, and then you measure the outcomes. Okay. So I don't think anyone debates whether in even today classical physics you have that. Clearly you can think of areas where you're, rolling a ball down a hill and you create a laboratory version of that. And it's very, okay. Okay. Biology, it's a lot harder, but if you sort of stick with the more physiological and less behavior you have, the more you do that. What about psychology? Well, in neuroscience, it's very easy, actually. Now, forget therapy. You mentioned psychoanalysis. I don't think anyone, by the way, almost no one in the field thinks that's scientific anymore. It's almost, I'm
Yeah,
like,
but it was considered.
no,
There
well,
were some people.
not among scientific psychologists. It never was. Even back in 1910, they were
Mhm.
saying, but among the people who are academic, cognitive psychologists, who are measuring, for example, I'll give you one which is very simple, reaction time. It's a very common thing, and it actually relates to certain behaviors. So you're measuring, it's precise, you get easily replicable results. I'll give you an amusing one. Where is an area in psychology where you have measurements as precise as parapsychology? There are areas in Paris. There are areas, the Gans
Good
field
point.
actually
Good point.
has been replicated
Yeah,
thousands. science with precise. Okay. So rather than saying science, if you could, I want you to continue and say in standard, gold standard random controlled experimentation. And yeah, I don't think there's much argument about that. That's an area of science.
That's an area of science, yes. But the other way around, the question is what areas of science or what we call science are really scientific in the sense, because as you said, there are areas of, well, if we don't want to call them science, there are disciplines, yeah, where you can't say that you have this exact science like in mathematics, in physics, but nevertheless, they should eventually deserve the name of science nonetheless, because otherwise, I think we can wipe out almost everything. Yeah, except perhaps but also in physics there are some things I would say, but in biology already we can see there are so complicated phenomena in biology where
Mhm.
you don't have this quantitative approach where you have numbers, make precise measurements of magnitudes, and these
Mhm.
plug in these magnitudes in a formula, you get out some result, and this is a formula that inside a theory that makes precise empiric predictions. Already in biology, you don't have that, or
So let's go back.
most of the
Let's
time.
go back to social construction.
Yeah,
What is we have this Galilean, Baconian empirical, measurement, quantitative, eliminate the subjective. People ask, why did that appear in Europe, mostly Western Europe, at a certain time in history? Now the Christians want to say Christianity, but like, I'm
yeah.
sorry, Christianity was around for 1600 years.
Mm,
Protestants will say it was the Protestants. I've seen many arguments. I don't see that having any weight. Or the atheists will say it's because we finally freed ourselves from religion, we come to the truth, which doesn't make sense either. Okay. I think John Gebser and Ian McGilchrist and Sri Aurobindo have a clue, which is that there was a certain kind of thinking which began about the Greece, but got strong with the scholastics around 1200. We see it in Thomas Aquinas, the attempt more and more to use pure reason, right,
yeah,
in religion, and then apply it to the world. And that was very, very much a European phenomenon.
yeah,
And back to the question you're saying about physics and biology. What happened was, to me, is that between 1600 and 1800s or so, this new method of extracting all subjectivity, all first person, was genius. It was brilliant. Whenever I talk to, anti-religious people or, pro-science, scientism types, it's like, yes, this was like unique. It was genius. And for a limited area of the universe, we're never going to, well, we won't replace it for till the supermantle descends. But anyway, won't replace it for a long time. But then we see if we're open-minded, you can't apply it precisely in the same way in biology. I've talked to cognitive scientists who don't have anything to do with therapy. It's not neuroscience, but they came into cognitive science with the attitude of a physicist. They want to be like physicists, right?
yeah,
They will tell you that we try to get rid of subject. It's not therapy, not psychoanalysis. It's just like take Jordan Peterson.
yeah,
His specialty is personality psychology. Now, I know leaders in the field of personality psychology, they say, we love this area and we have these measurements. We have the thing called the big five. It's agreeableness, conscientiousness, open-mindedness, and a few other things. And we get consistent measurements. And if you stand way, way back, they seem to replicate. But as you zero in, it is a complete mess. You can't define it. And there's literally nowhere. I mean, I saw my research with mindfulness. I could have changed the statistics a little bit and gotten any result I wanted.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Fortunately, I'm a relatively honest person, but I've talked to meditation researchers, over 20 years, and I say, do you have any means of knowing if the person's sitting there going like, damn, I hate this, I'm bored, I can't wait to go out and go to the bar. It's like they don't know. And they say, well, we ask them, really?
Mm,
Have you ever tried to meditate and then tell someone what's going on?
mm.
Right. So you're right. I agree totally. So let's go back to social construction. So what part of science is socially constructed? And what do you mean by science?
And what we mean exactly by social construction, the one way to put it is that our education, our ideological background, our belief system influences how we do make science and what and how we interpret the results of observations, experiments, or whatever. And if you're a physicalist and study the brain function and ask yourself a question about consciousness, you will have a certain attitude and a certain viewpoint and it's about viewpoints, yeah. And whereas if you're not the opposite of a physicalist, you will see something very different, yeah. Also in politics, we have this, yeah? We have the same facts, but well, not always. Sometimes not. We have very different facts. This should open a chapter about fact checking and so on. But let's leave this aside.
Right.
But we have the same facts, but we interpret these facts very differently and give them a very different value, also from a moral standpoint or from an ethical standpoint, from a political standpoint. And this, in science, believes to be immune from these things, but it's not at all. We are profoundly, profoundly influenced and conditioned by our belief system. And very often, what we believe is that these are not our beliefs, but they are beliefs that have been come from others, yeah? From a tradition, from our education, from the environment where we work.
Right.
And yeah, just last time when I had this talk with Bruce, we were talking because he had similar experiences like me in the publishing of papers.
Mhm.
And okay, the peer review system is a system that makes sense, but this also is very ideologically based, because if you have a referee, if you, for example, are how should we call the opposite of physicalist, the spiritualist, the
I
anti-physicalist?
do. You know,
I never
I
found
think
it.
no, no, no. But actually, in most physicalist journals, they just say it's physicalist or idealist. That's all they do.
Idealist. Okay, okay,
That's all they,
idealist.
which I think is
Even though
it's
you must
very
not necessarily,
misleading, but yeah,
yeah,
terribly.
or dualist or idealist. Yeah, okay.
Dualist has fallen out. For some reason, I don't see discussion of dualism as much. People go to physicalism or idealism now.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
okay. Yeah, I think also because now Bernardo Kastrup is in fashion and so on. I
yeah,
think in the 1990s it was more about dualism.
dualism.
Yeah.
Yes, you're
But
right.
anyhow,
You're right.
let's call them idealists. And if you're an idealist and have a referee who is a physicalist, you
Right.
almost certainly will not get through the peer review. Whereas if you have I saw this 50-50. You have 50-50 chance. I have now a sufficient number of papers that have tried hard to get through. And I see very clearly that it's not biological, ideologically based.
Right. Let me give you a different, as opposed to philosophic, let me give you objective and subjective. So
Yeah,
this is very interesting. Now, this is academic psychology, not therapy.
yeah,
In 1993, I had my research professor was one of the first, and she was a woman too, which is significant. She was the editor for the Journal of Emotions, right? Now, at the time, for most of the 20th century, psychologists would not speak of emotions
yeah.
because it's subjective, right?
It's
So,
not right.
and it's true also that cognition can often be defined in operational terms. You
Mm.
know, how what kind of perceptual data was available, what kind of steps were involved in learning. You can kind of define those things because you start with earthworms. For some reason, psychologists love earthworms. So they study learning, the process of learning where an earthworm learns to find some place and go back to it. Then they trace that through more and more complex animals to finally, well, the infant, learns perceptual stability and object object constancy and these things. And those are, object constancy, which is like if you I don't know if you remember from our book the story of that Oliver Sacks tells of Virgil, who regained his eyesight at 47 after losing at 6. When his dog moved, he perceived it as a new dog because he hadn't developed his dog moved, he couldn't tell what it was, right?
Yeah.
And then you realize, and that's not hard to it's visual, you can measure it and you can, measure towards what do you see now? What do you see? And you right. Now you say, I was really scared. How the hell do you operationalize scared? Do you know when I was doing pain management, now it turns out you can have a disc which is like fractured and have no pain.
Oh,
And you can have a disc that's imperfect. I mean, not fractured, but really, it looks on the X-ray, it looks really messed up. You don't feel any pain. You can have a disc in perfect shape, and you can have like just abysmal pain. So, with all of our technology, do you know how we measure pain? Marco, what is your pain on a scale of 1 to
yeah,
10?
you ask, just ask. Yeah.
Right. And then Marco says, Doc, man, mine's like 11 or 12. So then you say, okay, what's your pain on a scale of 1 to 100? Oh, 70 or 80. And you realize, like, if people can't count or understand numbers, how do you get them to rate?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But what is the alternative? Do you have a different approach? I mean, for a physician, not for a psychologist.
No,
If you're a physician and you have to give some painkiller and so,
they do the same thing. The
yeah,
physician, not
yeah,
the greatest physiatrists, pain cutters, they ask the patient, what's your pain on
yeah.
a scale of 10? And
And I
same thing,
think it's also subjective for every person.
it
You
is.
have exactly the same ailment, illness, or whatever that causes your pain. For example, I have completely different accounts from women when they get birth a child. Some
Right.
some women say, "Oh, terrible pain." Other tell me, "No, it was not that bad." I don't know. I have no idea. But it's also this can be very, very different. Well, it depends also from the child, probably. Yes. But it's interesting how people, and by the way, it depends also very much from our mind. There's also this
Right.
component, but
You
not
keep,
only.
you keep
Here,
a social.
I'm a physicalist in this sense. Yeah. So just to conclude, I'm a when I had COVID, it was not nothing dangerous for me, but it was extremely painful. I took painkiller, and it was perfect. It was
Right.
there is clearly a biochemical basis that kills you. We cannot deny that, no?
In Triarbenda's language, see what's happening is that when people do this, there's this constant argument in mind body literature, well, some things are amenable to the brain, some things aren't. This disparity makes no sense. I'm going to put it in different language.
Mm.
That given our present level of mental development, we only have the capacity to modify. Clearly, if Fioravento and the mother are saying anything true, there is no what you took. If you had sufficient conscious development, you could transform the pain into ananda. But you
Yeah,
don't.
yeah, I know that
Yeah,
they
that's
say
different.
that. Yeah,
Yeah. But let me see
this
about
is
the
really high
pregnancy.
level, yogic level. It's not
Exactly.
something that I think you can propose to a patient who is in pain in a.
No, I never would. They would fire me immediately. But about social construction and pain, I studied this. This is interesting. So if I told you German versus Venezuelan versus a Kenyan woman, who is likely to express their pain most most extremely.
Okay. Or less
Venezuela?
extremely would be a German,
Oh,
but this is
yes, it's true.
yeah, but this is again, I think, a social construct. This is a social. It's. I don't think this is a physical fact.
The placebo studies say that when you look at
Yeah.
the brain actually registers the pain in different cultures, in cultures where, now in Africa it's interesting because the culture in Africa for childbirth is that childbirth is not painful. The
Not.
brain will register.
Yeah.
They can measure this physiologically. The brain will register the pain differently. So
Yeah.
that,
But
yeah,
this does not imply that it is not linked to a social construct.
it is. No, I'm saying it is.
It is. Yeah,
Yeah.
it
Oh,
is.
I see what you mean. Yes, but it's also physiological too. It's both.
Yeah, a social construct becomes physiological also at the neurological level. But if
Right.
you believe in something, yeah,
Right.
placebo effect and so on, this belief modifies your brain. I don't think that it's not a physicalist proof of that it's all physical.
Right. Got
Yeah,
it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. That's. But try to explain this to them. It's not that easy. Yeah.
I have a physics question. If I'm an air traffic controller and I see an airplane heading towards the mountain and I want to know what the impact is physics the discipline I would use to? It's physics.
Today, usually it's made with radars. Yeah,
Right.
you have an electromagnetic wave, a radio wave that is reflected by the airplane. You can exactly see where its position, its speed. You know the
Uh-huh.
mountain is there, and a
Right.
computer in a fraction of a second
Right.
tells you that the airplane will hit the mountain in thought
Okay.
seconds, minutes.
And that's within the discipline of physics, right? Basically, that comes from all
Usually,
that
yeah,
math.
more, I would say more engineering, electronics engineering.
But isn't that based on
Yeah, it's
this?
based on physics, yeah.
Okay.
Doppler
So
effects and things like
we're
that.
using the science of physics to understand it. Now, if you look at that, I'm going to start going to philosophy, and I say, if the if the uh, if they don't control it in time and the airplane hits the mountain, what causes the airplane to split up? The
Yeah.
impact on the mountain, right? Okay. Now let's.
Or I may say the pilot that has gone mad and
But still,
like a kamikaze.
right, but still the impact. If we leave out the psychological, the impact of the
Okay,
physical.
the
Yeah,
physical impact is yeah. Okay.
I would notice that too. Now let's do my thought experiment.
Mm.
Here's my thought experiment. And this is a dream versus waking. And I just revised it because for decades, when I tell people, how do you know if you're dreaming or not? It doesn't matter how much they're aware of even spirituality. They'll say, no, a dream, I can tell it's obvious, it's dreamy. Or they'll say, the brain cannot generate an exact replica of the earth and all this stuff. So I've made it a thought experiment. So I start by saying, when Einstein talked about his thought experiment, where we wrote a light beam at the speed of light, I don't think anyone in the past century has ever said, now, wait a minute. We know a human being can't write a light. Okay, you take for granted. Okay, I looked up the definition of thought experiment. It says, yes, it's often one that's impossible. So my framework is, I'll put you in it. Marco has been in a dream for the past year and doesn't realize it. And in this dream world, it's a perfect, with one exception, which we won't go into till later, it's a perfect replica
Mm.
of the waking state world, which I'm not calling physical waking state world.
Mhm.
Now, we're giving Marco access to the greatest scientists in this dream world, Earth, and and actually the framework is we want to prove physicalism is true. And
Yeah,
we're
yeah,
even,
yeah.
well,
Okay.
wait.
Yeah.
We're going to acknowledge that technically speaking, science, physics science, the most solid, kind of precise science, is metaphysically neutral. But we physicalists believe that physicalism, the independent physical world, is the most logical inference from results of science. So we're going to ask Marco, Marco, I want you to perform any number of experiments. Can you find the one place in the dream universe which will give you an inference that there is an independent physical universe? This is the dream universe.
Yeah.
I kind of don't want to give, in case someone watches this and tries it, I'm not going to give away the secret, but my answer is I would like to take, let's go back to the plane thing, right? Obviously, if it turns out this is a plane universe, it wasn't the mountain that caused anything. It was images in a dream.
Yeah. But why should in the imagery of the dream explode the airplane when it hits the mountain?
It's an exact replica, just everything in the dream acts the same way
Ah,
it does.
yeah. So I'm sorry, I'm just looking for because in my book and in my new book, I just described that. And because this is initially, it was my coincidentally, it was my first
The airplane?
approach to something that went beyond physicalism. But it is so long ago that I had a hard time to remember exactly. Yeah, I will find it because when I was a child, I asked myself the same question. And there were some people who already told me there is no way to make this distinction. And I found this absolutely nonsense. I said, of course, there must be. But then I thought about it. I couldn't find a rational answer to that. And this didn't convince me in the first place. But I said, it was the first time where I said, okay, these weird people who think that we live in a dream state and so on have a point. It's not so easy to deconstruct their ideas because I don't know why, but it's not so easy as I thought it would be. Yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah, I described it in my last book. Could be interesting to read it out, but I don't remember
You'll find it. You'll find it later. Yeah. I don't
that.
want to go into that too much. I just want to say that um, my aim is twofold. Is to and this I think relates back to social constructivism. You know, one that science as a method is metaphysically neutral, and to question if you can't come up with any experiment, any in the history of science that could determine whether this universe is a dream universe
But
or
the point is also, what does it mean that something is a dream?
we're not going to ask. We're,
From what do we distinguish dream from waking state? Because the distinction already implies that there is a difference. So you
right.
already start from this idea that there is difference, and then ask what is the difference. But you
Right.
posit
We're
it a
we're
definition.
leaving that unanswered at first.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
but
you
someone could come up with this objection. Please,
yeah,
if you are not able to make this difference, you are not allowed to make the question.
right. I would say, do you dream? You know what a dream is. You know when you wake up. You're in an environment which is not a physical one,
Yeah.
which you so that's I would leave the analysis. I can try and get them to leave the analysis till later. Anyway, I'll leave
Mhm.
that for now. I have did you have more you want to say about social construction?
No, no, no. But I think let's finish with a moment this thing with the dream state. So you say
Oh,
that since we cannot prove that there is a difference,
mhm.
then what? This did.
The
In what
physicalist
sense
argument
does this
yeah,
deny physicalism?
doesn't. No, it doesn't at all. And
Mm.
that's not my. So if we come to an agreement, and most physicalists will agree, I found generally they'll
Yeah,
agree that technically speaking, this in pure empirical data does not provide by itself evidence, much less support evidence for a standalone universe. Okay, but the data we have provides logical reasons. I'll give you an example. Here's one that they use a lot. In 2025, astronomers discovered 128 moons around Saturn they hadn't seen before. And because no one, by the way, this is where your distinction between mind and consciousness, chit and chitta, is so. I'm seeing more and more. This is in
Yeah.
every discussion. People are always talking about mind. They're not talking about consciousness.
Yeah.
So people will say, you see, no human being in their mind had perceived these moons because we discovered it. That's independent of minds. To which you and I would say, yes, of course it is. There's there's plenty. Marco exists independently of my mind. I exist independently of his. I hope he does.
The question is, how much does this tell us? Is the conclusion of should this lead us to a conclusion that nothing exists, or that everything exists, or what? Or
I
that
would say to the person that wants to ask these questions later, we need to go through until this is where, as a psychologist, it's experiential. You really have to go through this to
Mm,
get to the end. And if you're not willing to do it, not to do it. But like, I would take like that. Here's an experiment. Here's what I would say. Um, Normally, I will deal with your question, your initial question. Okay, so most people will say the dream. Oh, here's what they say nowadays. Okay, so both our waking and dream environment are brain generated,
yeah.
but the waking environment is brain generated based on external stimuli, and the dream environment is brain generated based on internal stimuli. Okay, so if you and I that's I hadn't thought of this. This is a good way to frame it more in a more physicalist way. Don't deal with consciousness, just like okay, what the question the physicalists and idealists are arguing about is that external stimuli. If scientific empirical experiments do not tell us the nature of the external stimuli,
Mm,
they're left with a philosophic argument. You've deprived them of a scientific argument for physicalism.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
you have a physical, which is okay. So the philosophic one then is what is the physicalist argument is the data we have from empirical science tells us much more reasonably that X, that unknown, is also physical. It's standalone physical.
Mm,
Illa says, Bernardo's argument, which I think is indisputable, is like, if all that we know within our so-called brain-generated experience, if we know forms within awareness, okay, okay, if that's what we know, and most people won't go there between, okay, then why do you propose that the forms exist by themselves? That's the X. Why not say it's his little parsimonious thing, which I don't care about Occam's razor, but why is it requires fewer assumptions to say, why not assume that stimulus is also a form of some kind within a larger awareness? That was what my article, this thought experiment, if I frame it as I want to find support for physicalism and start there. And I think it's a good thing. Let's take it step by step. So, for example, I'll conclude with this. The experiment this year, it's just early this year, where they found these moons. What you're saying then is that the data from the astronomers, they had certain, I don't know how they do it. I have to learn that it was some other computer analyzes the light, whatever light movements, right?
yeah, they see dots that move.
Right, exactly right. So whether you're seeing, so you have two things. You have computer data, which is, you know, purely mathematical data, and you may have the astronomers then looking, you have certain perceptions. The physicalist says those perceptions are perceptions, stimulated by the brain of something purely physical. Does that tell me anything more? Those perceptions are perceptions of something existing in universal consciousness. And they keep saying there's no evidence of it, universal consciousness. There's no evidence of physical standalone stuff either. There's
Mm,
no evidence. Can we stay, if we're going to do philosophy, let's do philosophy and don't bring in science where it doesn't belong. There's no evidence for purely physical stuff. There's no
yeah,
evidence. You're right. There's no
in a
there's
sense,
no
yes.
scientific evidence for consciousness as a subjective phenomenon.
Yeah.
So, but they keep bringing that in. They keep cheating.
But when you get them to the point where they say that the external reality is brain generated and the dream state is internally generated. I think that you have already brought them quite far.
Well,
And at that point,
yeah, go ahead.
at that point, I would tell them, but what is then your idea of a brain, of neurons, a neural network? These are also generated abstractions in your mind. How
Yes.
do you suppose, how do you think that from these abstractions you can explain yeah, the
I've
emergence of
had,
consciousness? Because it becomes circular at that point, and I think if you are able to bring them to the point where they say that the external reality is brain generated, then point to the fact that also the brain is something generated by the brain.
yes, yes.
You get them in a logical, self-referential loop that I think if they are honest, they realize what we are talking about.
Okay, I've had this discussion with a
Mm.
world-class neuroscientist, Anil
Yeah.
Seth. He's a British citizen of Indian background. In terms of social construction, this is interesting.
Mm.
And it was in the journal AEON, Ion. Anyway,
Mm.
he wrote an article making the point. This is like 8 years ago, that the only difference between dream and waking is that they're controlled hallucinations, and the dream is based on internal,
Yeah.
and this is and waking on
But
external.
he, in a certain sense, Anil said, is a sort of idealist that doesn't recognize that he is an idealist.
Yes, yes. Well,
Yeah, yeah.
let me finish, because this, by the way, is a huge shift from when I first looked at lucid dreams 40 years ago. This was you couldn't say anything like this. This
Yeah,
is
yeah, that's true. Yeah,
um, Anil wrote a book saying our whole world is a hallucination.
yeah,
Okay, so wait. So we asked him there were like 50 people talking about, five of us were like non-dualists, whatever. So we said, but Anil, isn't the brain also what you're just saying, right? He says, well, yes, I see that, but inference by inference, blah, blah, blah. He used the basic argument. Now, let's go back to social construction. Anil comes from
yeah,
a cultural background, where I
yeah.
remember chemists at a college where I taught. Oh yeah, my professor back in, I guess, 1960s, my chemistry professor said, of course, all laws are expression of the Brahman, and he had no problem with it. And many Indian scientists, if you go a little bit, get them in a corner, get them away from their, colleagues, they'll say, oh yes, of course. And they'll explain beautifully. They'll sound like Marco Masi. He's talking this is the Brahman and the laws, and just very, very clear. So Anil Seth was brought up in England, which is the heart of, agnostic, physicalist, that Bertrand Russell mentality. So he's got this cultural background, which is different. He's got this British upbringing. He's probably, I think, Cambridge among scientists who are very much physicalists. So, but he's sincere, but he gets stuck.
Yeah.
That's social. Yeah.
Yeah. But also, you mentioned Bertrand Russell. Bertrand Russell also tried to deconstruct the idealist viewpoint, and at
Right.
the end, he had to admit that
Right.
he couldn't. Yeah,
But right.
yeah. But they don't take this last step. Yeah, that's because of the social construct that has been built since the time of, I would say, at the latest from the scientific revolution. Yeah, let me read only briefly because I found now this is a new book I'm writing, and I ask: Is reality an illusion, and do we
Oh,
live in a simulation? Well, okay, let's keep aside the simulation thing. But is reality an illusion?
uh-huh.
When I was a child, I remember someone asking the question of how we know that all we are experiencing isn't just a dream.
Right.
Couldn't all our life, all the sensations we have, all the so-called objective reality we perceive just be an illusion, a sort of dream with no inherent existence? For some reason, this question never left me. As a young and naive mind, I thought that the eventuality of our lives being nothing more than a figment, a sort of fairy tale, something with no more and no less consistency than a dream, was a silly idea and not worth of much attention. However, my attempt to deconstruct it and prove the opposite soon hit against very well-founded logical arguments, which left me for a long time questioning the validity of one point of view versus the other. On the one hand, it isn't easy to disprove all of our existence, that all of our existence is an illusion. On the other hand, it is hard to believe that nothing exists because, if so, after all, there is at least someone having that illusion. And who then is having that illusion? Only when I was in my 20s and encountered and studied the Indian non-dual teachings of Advaita Vedanta could I begin to make sense of all of this, putting things into a larger context. So this
Beautiful.
is the beginning of the first paragraph. And yeah, in a certain sense, you're taking up something that conditioned my early questionings as a part-time philosopher already then. Yeah.
Let me make a point about it because I'm not approaching this as a scientist. I'm not approaching it philosophically. I'm approaching it as a therapist.
Yeah, a
I
first-person perspective. Yeah.
well, not even that will be science, but this is literally a therapist because now anyone who does the thought experiment, please don't watch this video at this point because I'm going to give something away. Yeah. If physicalism is really a cult, in
Sorry?
some way, if physicalism is really a cult.
A cult, yeah, a cult. Yeah.
Often I talk to people, let's see, oh boy, I'm going to really get controversial here. So to me, MAGA is a cult in the United States.
Yeah.
It's a cult, right? Okay. And I tell people, the number one, and I've seen religious and spiritual cults, Eastern and Western in the United States too. When you meet someone who's in a cult, and this, by the way, this thing called personality disorders in psychiatry, and they're not psychotic, but their beliefs are so entrenched. If you challenge them, they'll never come back. So, when you say, I remember one at Bellevue Psychiatric Hospital, a woman came up to me, she said, I know you're my lawyer, right? Okay. So the last thing I want to say to her is like, I'm not a lawyer. I say, yes, I remember you came to my law office some years ago. Well, I've switched now to a psychology coach. It's like, oh, okay. So when I talk to someone about climate change,
It was dreaming. It was dream. Prove that it's not true. Prove it.
Right.
Prove the opposite.
Exactly. I'll just give one more example. I remember talking to someone who was an artist. I said, have you ever had any biology classes? No, back in high school, I failed them all. But he knows that climate change is a lie.
Mm.
If I want to have a conversation with him, I'm not going to talk science. I'm going to say, yeah, I've had some questions and I'm wondering too, what do you think? And he's very friendly. He'll talk to me. Same thing like, I'll say, yeah, Donald Trump, he's very funny. And I think that he really, he certainly knows a lot about money. He grew up with a lot of money. Let's have a conversation. And then in the conversation, they're now open to you. And you might at some point mention some tension, some conflicts, and they may come over. I remember, I'm sorry, last one, I talked to this guy, very conservative. He was completely anti-abortion. He had a daughter. And I said, if the doctor came to you and said, she and the fetus will die, unquestionably, would you consider? And he just kept saying, you can't know. I said, hypothetically, you can't know. Now, this is someone you're not going to talk to. This is a cult. This is not, But same with the physicalists. It's like, okay, you've got to the point where you can say, this is hallucination, one generated by external, one by internal stimuli. You leave your accurate caveat about what the brain is, leave that out for now, and say, let's come up with experiments that will provide logic support for physicalism. Now, at some point, they won't be able to.
No, sure.
Yeah.
They will not. No. But I think that most physicalists, at least those who are don't question so much these philosophical issues, at some point will tell you, oh yeah, okay, it's not so clear, but I don't care. I'm interested in a science. Has a pragmatic point of view and takes a pragmatic stance. And as an experiment, I make my measurements. And if the experiment predicts the measurement, then I'm happy with that. And they will tell you that it's essentially what's called the shut up and calculate philosophy.
Yes, right,
And
right.
yeah, and I think this is also what mm, you know, last time we discussed about the quantum physics thing, how we can interpret quantum physics and so on. And Niels Bohr came up, yeah, very often. Yeah, but Niels Bohr was a pragmatist, yeah. You say that you like his approach to quantum physics because he effectively he realizes, yeah, that not that everything could be compared to a dream, but he says at the end it's all our human sensations, and
Right,
what we call a measurement is I don't remember now the exact words, but essentially he agrees with a cubist. The cubist is a particular interpretation of quantum mechanics that
right,
says that everything is about a belief system. Yeah, when we make measurements, we update our belief system and to our knowledge,
right,
and that's not, we cannot say more than that, and we
right.
should not say more than that. And this is an approach that idealists like a lot, yeah,
Hmm.
because it is in a sense puts in the center the subjective human element.
Hmm.
But yeah, but so what? At the end, it doesn't tell you nothing about it because it stops short from thinking. It says, stop thinking, shut
Right.
up and calculate.
I got
Yeah, so that's why I'm not satisfied with this. It's not sufficient to say everything is subjective, everything is
Oh,
in awareness, everything is a subjective experience. Yeah, so what? Then stop thinking about it. We we must take a pragmatic point of view and say that everything is about a belief system. But then what is this reality? Who is making this yeah, having
right.
it's
Let's
not
leave.
sufficient.
I have a question for you based on the conversation we had a couple of months ago. And I think it was one thing we got misunderstood. We had a long, long conversation. I thought we never got clear about it. And this is a good segue. It's about awareness and what's awareness and all of that. And
Mm.
let's if we can go into overt spiritual territory.
Yeah, okay.
So let me make clear, I think I didn't say this at all, where I'm coming from. So I had an experience when I was 17, and for most of my life, I haven't talked about it much, except to a few people. Last year or two, suddenly it's like, there's this reservation about talking about deep spiritual experiences. And I'll talk because I'm going to talk about it because it's framed my entire life. And it has to do with your distinction between chit and chitta, between awareness, mental awareness versus consciousness,
Yeah.
all encompassing consciousness. So I woke up the morning of May 10th, 1970, pretty much an atheist or agnostic. If someone had told me I decided I was an atheist when I was 7. If someone explained to me the Indian view, I would have been totally open to it. But all I knew of religion as a child was the old psychopath up in the sky smiting us when he didn't like what we did. And I thought, this is nonsense. A Jewish friend when I was 15 told me about the word agnostic, and I thought, I like that better, open-minded, right? But still, I was like, I had no interest in religion. I was taking a year off from high school, doing music full time, and I started getting in literature and history and philosophy, but I hadn't read anything about mysticism or religion. So I wake up and at 2:30 in the afternoon, I'm reading a book and I read the sentence, religion was never about belief, but it's about experience. And experience was in italics.
Mm.
And I hadn't heard of this anywhere. No one ever told me. I look at the wall and I don't think this. I see it. The wall is God. And I go, I'm God. The floor, and I'm not just like, it's not a thought, it's like I'm actually seeing everything is like shimmering and alive, and it's all the same. God, I look outside the trees and the streets. I have these like it's not a vision, but these images of throngs of people walking through the cities. I remember Tokyo and New York for some reason, and they're like unconscious. They don't see that like themselves and everything around them is God. I had some other visions of my life to come, and they've all come true. But just that. So my original, awakening was not this sort of dull, everything's an awareness and whatever. It was like I always knew what I was looking for. I was looking for some teaching, spiritual thing where it wasn't like some abstract God, it's like pure consciousness, often and it wasn't a religious personal thing, but also knew that the personal aspect of God was real because this thing I was seeing was manifesting as all this beauty and wonder and everything. So that, Ramakrishna was the closest I came before I came to Sri Aurobindo, because he understood the pervading monism of God, but he also understood the dynamic reality of it. I read Adventure of Consciousness 6 years later, and I remember the chapter on consciousness. It was a chapter on consciousness where I read the second page. I know this. This is familiar. I was looking for this for the past 6 years.
Mm.
So let's go to now the conversation we had. I used the popular terms awareness. So, and sometimes I'm talking to a physicalist, I'll say, this is the phrase you objected to. I said, is one way of describing our ordinary experience, just not, okay, is there is a field of awareness and objects, sensory objects appear in that field. You were suggesting I was making the world illusory, and I didn't mean that. I just
Mm.
said just taking our everyday experience. We're not making any philosophic. This is not philosophy. This is like again psychology. So Dan Siegel will talk about the wheel of awareness, and we go into the experience of awareness, which includes all of our experience, all the objects. If you start there, and by the way, most physicalists will not. They'll stop at some point, but that's okay. If we start there and say, what is there beyond that? Now, you and I would both say it's a dynamic divine reality and it's evolving, and that's fine. But we don't need to pose something which people can't understand. If we start with that, what do we assume is beyond? And this is where chit and chitta is so important. The awareness I'm speaking of now is the mind. I'm not speaking of some cosmic. I'm saying, isn't our ordinary waking experience one where in the mental chitta awareness, there's forms. This is like this is taken for granted. Dan Siegel teaches this around the world in schools around the world. 5 million children learning this. Okay. Then we do philosophy. Then we do meditation. Does this make sense?
Yes, but I don't understand. What is your conclusion? What is aim of this? Of these
I
observations.
think I think recognizing the common nature of our experience this way is I've found in teaching meditation, like just meditation, I can tell you. So if I open my attention to the full range of experience
Yeah.
and actually experience it as a field of awareness, my mind stops.
Yeah.
This
Okay.
happens within 5 seconds. Generally, during the day, if I stop, literally the conversation in the mind will just stop totally, and I'll feel this sense of openness, silence, spaciousness. And it's probably, if you're going to do therapy or have some pain or trouble with sleep, whatever, this is almost the ideal state to be in to
Mm.
psychologically. Okay.
Yeah.
Similarly, philosophically, if we start here, this is not the end, this is the starting point, just to
Yeah.
recognize what then do we say? This is Bernardo's argument. What do we say about the world outside my mind? Is it not of the same nature? Then we begin to say, let's look more closely. If all of our science experiments for the past 400 years have generally been in the assumption that I'm located here in a world of separate objects, how does it change? I don't have a conclusion to say when it's like this is like a century of work. How does it change my understanding of the airplane, going going to the mountain, or a woman in childbirth, or organisms, in evolution. How does it change? Does it? I'm asking as an open question. I think it changes everything, but how does it change my understanding of how science is conducted? Does it let in a different understanding of how consciousness, mind, and matter interact? And it may allow me, does it allow me to open to the influence and the causal efficacy of consciousness? So rather than, like, I think you asked a question about physical closure. You said, well, don't we see everywhere there's physical causes everywhere? Well, maybe we don't, if we think maybe there's no.
There is already the distinction is the wrong step in the wrong direction. Because
Right.
if I speak about the physical closure, I already assume a distinction between physical and non-physical. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. Just it gives us a way to go in a different direction. That's to me what it does.
Yes, but in this dream, you have things that we perceive and reify and abstract as objects. Say, for
Right.
example, a bottle,
A what?
a bottle, a
Good.
bottle of 1 liter. Yeah, so some is perhaps a bit less than 1 liter, but half a liter or
Yes.
whatever. And you put how much? What's the volume? In America, you have probably you thinking gallons, I guess, but
That's fine. Whatever. That's fine. Whatever.
it has a certain volume.
Yeah.
And you put a certain amount of water into it,
Mhm.
and then drink it or empty it. How much water will come out of that?
Let's see. Yeah.
The same amount of water that you
Right.
put
So
in comes
right.
out.
Right.
Why is that? Why could not, if you put 1 liter, why couldn't there come 3 liters out of that?
Well, let's wait a second now.
Mm.
Do you want 3 liters to come out?
Okay, I could also
Wait.
will that and
Wait.
want it and desire it. I'm very thirsty, and yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
let's
Why can't 3 liters come out?
yeah.
Why? No, I'm asking you. You seem to think 3 liters couldn't come out.
No,
Why not?
I have no idea, but it's the experience in the dream. It's the regularity in the dream.
Right.
How
Now,
can you?
okay, well, I'll jump right in there. I have become a master lucid dreamer in that dream, and I have the ability to change the matter of the dream, psychokinesis. And I put 3 liters of
I have
water in
never
here,
experienced that.
and I
Can you?
put 3 liters of water. Oh, in lucid dreams, it's very easy.
Oh, but yeah, but why is it that in that kind of dream that we call the waking state, this is never
Right.
possible?
Because our minds are not well developed. It's very
So
simple.
you say that a future species that is more evolved than us and has a more
Doesn't,
developed mind could
doesn't. Are you if we're human beings now, if we developed our mind more, we've seen this. I mean, the Tibetan Buddhists have done this for thousands of years.
produce water from, yeah, there was a guy 2000 years ago that produced also
You take
fishes
this
and bread. And yeah.
container here with mince in it and turn it into whatever you want. Chicken, eggs.
So, in your opinion, this is not because of something inherently in the dream, in this universal dream, but it is because of our personal inability to see things otherwise.
Yeah,
So,
I've never had trouble with that. Yeah, no. Yeah.
so by the way, it's also that the prep that come out 3 liters instead of one, but it's our mind that is unable to see that.
Yeah. I mean, how do I have a dream? How do I have a dream where I go into an apartment where I've never been in the apartment and I see a bookshelf which is located in a place almost no one ever has any bookshelves, got hundreds of books. I go to a precise location on a precise shelf, pull out the book. I see the cover design. I see the author. I wake up. I know when I wake up, I went there. So on a pretext, I go there. I see the layout, the entire apartment. I see the bookshelf. I see the exact location. I see the book, I pull it out, same cover design.
Yeah, but
Now,
this is okay. This could also this is a different kind of phenomena, I would say. It's not
still
about
one,
it's about a phenomenon of precognition
right,
of something
right.
that in this dream is, but your precognition didn't undo this what is. It already saw it and anticipated it and somehow got into contact with this isness, with this something that is like it is. So this is a reason further to believe that there is something that is independent from our mind. And sometimes our minds are able to get into contact without visual or sensory
Right.
usual normal sensory contacts. But this is a reason more to believe that there is something concrete and has its state of being, so to speak, independently from our individual. And
Oh,
individual
I,
here is important.
yeah, I'm not questioning
Our
that.
individual minds, yeah?
Right. Yeah, yeah, I don't question that at all. Are you doubting psychokinesis? Is that what you're doubting?
No, 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 I'm not doubting that. But I'm doubting this idea that you can create out of nothing, yeah, a chunk of matter of 1 liter of whiskey.
The Dalai Lama
Yeah. Okay.
at the mind no at a Harvard Mind and Life conference, the theme was visualization, and they were almost all physicalists. And they were asking, they said that the Tibetan Buddhists have developed this amazing ability where they can, they can see in front of them a perfect replica of whatever.
Yeah.
The Dalai Lama sort of like, he knew he'd get a reaction. He just said quietly, he said, sometimes other people can see it too. And the guy the Harvard psychologist, kind of got nervous, said, let's go on to the next subject. You know.
Yeah.
So, right. And the other person can see it and touch it, according to the
Yeah.
Dalai
Yeah.
Lama.
But perhaps there is something there on in a subtle realm or subtle physical or whatever we would like to call it. Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. But
Of course.
this, even if you talk about a subtle physical, you are
Right.
talking about something concretely that exists in its manifestation
Mhm.
to our forms of perception that must not necessarily be physical perception, but can also be
Right.
extrasensory perceptions
Right.
that exists independently from the individual perceiver.
100%. Yeah. We're already, you and I are already going way beyond anything any physicalist wants to talk about.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
sure, of course.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
I agree completely. Yeah. But if imagine, this is what I wrote the appendix in our book about, our yoga psychology book. Imagine if you as a physicist, oh, let's say I was a physicist too. Oh boy, I get 20 years of physics. Just like I'm a physicist now too. Okay. So we're both physicists. And we see problems with hunger.
yeah,
Now, you and I have studied and mastered our ability to travel in and out of various subtle and vital and mental planes, right? But we're primarily trained as physical, earthling physicalists. But we've developed our minds now, and we go to you and I have nightly journeys to the subtle physical plane, and we practice, materializing food out of subtle matter, and we go to the vital plane. And we say, Marco, let's see if we can teleport, whatever, transport um, uh, subtle food into the earth plane. Now, I had a friend,
yeah. But
wait,
this is a different
wait,
thing. It's not the
wait, wait,
same
wait.
thing as okay, okay.
I had a friend who was developing a machine. I don't know if he was a doctor and a physicist that he thought could amplify people's subtle consciousness to help them materialize things. But go ahead. How's that not different from materializing? So I
Because
materialize.
it exists in the subtle realm.
Sure,
but it exists.
Yeah. So I may want to.
This is so. I have also written about the subtle physical. Is perfectly in line with modern physics. Modern physics even suggests it. Don't tell this to the other physicists who will, because here
Right.
again we are in the social construct. But
Right.
modern physics, theoretical physics, even suggests the possible potential its existence of subtle realms. So I am
Right.
totally open to that. But in the subtle realm, these plus 2 liters that came out of nothing existed.
Right. So let's go back to
So
the
there are regularities.
Mhm.
When we say you put into a basket, yeah, one apple, and
Right.
out of this basket must come one apple. There cannot come 3 apples, yeah.
Right.
Or if they do, they came from the subtle physical, but they did not materialize from nothing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why?
That's regular.
And what I'm trying to say that it's true that all is in the field of awareness. It's true that all is experience. It's true that all, I like to use this idea of the shadow. You're only perceiving shadows, and these are only abstractions of our mind, everything, also all the things that physics describes. But this does not imply that there isn't some
Regularity.
universal,
Mhm.
yeah, a universal, whatever you want to call it,
Yeah. I
that
have no problem with that.
it seemed to me that you had it indeed, because when I say, for example, because here, okay, here we get back to the quantum physics and the stuff. I say that quantum physics is a manifestation of a universal consciousness. Yeah.
Hmm.
Which doesn't mean that I take it literally. Yeah. When I say there's a particle, that also is just an abstraction of our mind. In fact, quantum physics precisely suggests that there are no particles. Yeah. There are potentialities. There's a potentiality to detect something, to measure something, that there is an interaction. But I think we can, in the limits or that our concepts have, that words, especially words have, we can create a bridge between the divine and also what we call these lower level, lower mind abstractions that we have in physics, mathematics, and science. Yeah,
I agree 100%. Yeah. Right.
yeah. But it seemed last time that we didn't. So
No, I don't think so. I have to actually go pretty soon. But let
yeah,
me make a quick sentence. I really don't have of much interest in philosophy. I'll tell you why I became interested in it. When I read Adventure of Consciousness, I remember talking to people about it, and they seemed so confused. It seemed so simple to me, and I couldn't understand. I never understood why it was hard to talk about until I started understanding about materialism and
yeah,
later. Okay, so I think philosophy seems to be indispensable to me for one reason, to clarify what science does. Because usually people
doesn't.
appeal to science to prove that whatever can't be possible. It's like, if we could just I would like to take 10 minutes and be done with philosophy. It's like, that's why I like the thought experiment. It's like, look, here's, we agree that science is metaphysically neutral, but you think that it still supports you. Let's do this experiment. You see it doesn't. Now let's talk about spirituality. Now let's talk about the divine. You don't have to be afraid. I think there's a sincerity
Yeah,
there that for people who don't know much about spirituality, I would say like Richard Dawkins. He recently, by the way, he recently said, Dean Radin has this in his new book, that maybe consciousness is beyond the brain.
oh
Dawkins.
yeah, Richard Dawkins. Oh,
I'll send you,
incredible. Yeah, really.
I'll send you the quote.
I
Okay.
didn't know that.
So I think as long as he thought religion was an impediment to science, there's a certain integrity. Like, I love science. I don't want, okay. So if you do the philosophy, get that clear. I'm done with philosophy. I don't, when Rod Hemsel's talking about Hegel and Bergson and Whitehead, I just have no interest at all. I just don't
Yeah, yeah,
care.
but this is a personal approach, I think.
I don't care about any of that stuff.
Yeah, yeah. But this is completely okay because I think every one of us has one's own path There is
Yeah.
not one path that is fits all. And
No,
I
but my
also,
path is better. My path is better. No,
yeah, 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 of
I'm
course,
kidding.
yes, it's all obviously. No, but I think also philosophy cannot be useful to have realizations, spiritual realizations. I
Right,
use it also only, almost exclusively, only as a means to show our beliefs, our false beliefs,
right,
to highlight that it does not prove what many people believe it proves. Yeah. There is this, and once you have realized that, you are already a step beyond, and then you don't need it at all. But
I agree.
perhaps that first step, philosophy is needed to show that some assumptions that we give for granted are
Right,
not at all obvious. Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
just need philosophers who understand that.
Huh?
You need philosophers who
Yeah.
understand that.
Yeah.
Don't defend
Yeah.
physicalism.
Philosophers
Right,
or philosophical approach, of course. Yeah.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think this is also was behind Sri Aurobindo's philosophical language in the Life Divine.
I
He
think so
didn't,
too.
I don't think that he really believed that using that approach could make someone have any realization.
Right.
But it helps the mind, only the mind, to
Hmm.
detach from certain assumptions and question. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that a lot. Yeah.
Okay, Don. So we had
Let's
a
talk again. This was great. Let's talk again sooner rather than later. Let's talk again soon.
yeah. I think we have different points of view, but they complement each other very well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
this was also the topic yesterday that we have these different perspectives and have the ability to see everything from all the perspectives. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, that's not easy, but necessary.